Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show. Another exciting show and definitely another exciting guest. Let me tell you where we're going today. Imagine having the opportunity to be with one of the greatest, if not the greatest, sports figure in this country. Let me tell you, I'm not going to tell you who he is right now, but just imagine growing up in a time of the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, and being a man of color. Realizing that you love everybody, but you're caught between a rock and a hard place. Your career as a professional boxer, your career as a family member, your religious or your spiritual identification is also being scrutinized. And like I said, we're dealing with race. Imagine that. But imagine being a Caucasian woman during all this, a young, beautiful Caucasian woman, and for the first time setting your eyes upon the greatest athlete to grace this planet, the one, the only Muhammad Ali, what that must be like. Today on the show, we have a beautiful young lady who actually had that opportunity and was deeply blessed with not only being a good friend of the greatest boxer ever, but is in the process of telling her story on what that was like to grow up in that era and be a part of that era. I'd like to welcome to the show the one, the only Miss Kelly Reilly Baldwin. How are we doing, Kelly?
We are doing great. Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Man, I can't wait to read the book.
Thank you.
I saw the pictures. I saw the pictures, but I can't wait. I can't wait to read the book. Before we get started with your beautiful journey, tell the viewers a little bit about who you are.
There's so many ways you can answer that question, but I think I am a woman who tries to care about what matters, who tries to spend my time and invest my heart and mind into the things that matter. I think it's so easy to just get swept up by life, and it speeds by. And if you're not careful and if you're not intentional, you look back and say, what happened? Where has my life gone? So I'm a woman who's trying real hard not to do that, because I know how you spend your days is how you spend your life. But married woman, married for almost 36 years, mother of 3 amazing young adults, somebody who's worked both in athlete representation and in full-time humanitarian work, and now an author. My debut memoir.
You mentioned when I talked to you earlier when we first came on, I saw 440.
Yes.
And then I said, where are you at? You said Mexico. I said, hold down. This is 440. So we both lived in the Ohio, Cleveland area. Avon Lake for me, Cleveland for you. Your journey to meeting Muhammad Ali, where did that start at?
Yeah, so I was living in Strongsville, which is on the west side of Cleveland. Okay. And that's where I grew up, and we still have a home there. And I was a young teenager and doing some small town, some mid-market, I guess Cleveland was considered, modeling at the time, and wanted to take it to the next level if I had the opportunity to do so. And no one ever knows, whether you're going to be able to make it in New York. But we went to New York. My dad had a business trip there, and we ended up meeting Muhammad and his business manager, Gene Kilroy, in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel right by Central Park. And there's that was a chance meeting, perhaps. Gene, Muhammad's manager, always said the keeper of the stars knows which souls need to find one another, and that he brought us together. And I believe that. So that chance meeting led to really changing my life. It was
what did you know about him? What did you know about Muhammad Ali, or did you know who he was in general?
This was 1978, so everyone knew who Muhammad Ali was. It shocks me today that there are some young people who don't know who Muhammad is. But in 1978, everyone, not only in the United States, but around the world, knew who Muhammad was. He was considered the most famous man alive at the time. And I, was 13. I was a cheerleader, as I said, a aspiring model, and not a big, I was a Cleveland Browns fan because I grew up in Cleveland, but I was not a big sports fan and definitely was not a boxing fan. But Muhammad had transcended boxing, had transcended sports. And, this was after Foreman, after Frazier. This was after Norton, it was 1978. So he was doing television commercials, radio commercials. He had been on the cover of, I don't know, maybe 1,000 magazines. So I definitely knew who he was, what he looked like, his voice. I couldn't tell you his fight record, but I knew he was champion. And at the time, technically, he wasn't champion. He had just lost to Leon Spinks. But he was, I knew well enough that he was forever the champ. Muhammad is still the champ.
What do you remember being the first thing that he said to you? Because to me, at that time, I would have been like, wow, I would definitely remember exactly what I said and what he said to me.
Yeah. So I had left my modeling portfolio in a taxi cab and I was very upset. And Jean, Muhammad's manager, said, "Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about it." And I thought, that's a ridiculous thing for this stranger to say to me. He must not understand how serious it is that I've just lost my portfolio. And he said, "No, come meet the champ and we'll figure it out." And I looked across the lobby and there was Muhammad, and I suddenly did forget about my portfolio. And, we walked across the lobby and Jean introduced us to Muhammad, and Muhammad said something to the effect of, "I saw two pretty ladies over there looking upset and had to send this guy over to, make sure you were all right." And so he had sent Jean over to retrieve us and see if we needed help. And, that might sound like, two women in the lobby and Muhammad sent somebody to them, but that I don't want it to come across that way because it wasn't like a pickup situation at all. Muhammad was always very much focused on who has God put in my path, who is standing before me, and what do I have to offer that will help that person, whether it be encouragement or money or find out what the problem is and let me help her find her portfolio or get her a new one, So
did he find the portfolio?
Jean Kilroy found my portfolio from a taxi that had driven away in a city that has more taxis than, I don't know, maybe any place but Hong Kong.
So how did the relationship flourish? You're still young. You're a cheerleader from Cleveland, Ohio. You leave from being with him. How did you guys manage to stay connected and flourish the relationship thereafter you leaving?
Yeah. So before we left that weekend or week, I don't even remember whether it was a weekday or a weekend, but before we left New York, Jean had before he started working for Muhammad, Jean and Muhammad met in 1960 at the Rome Olympics. So, he was the entourage member who was with Muhammad, from the very beginning. But before he worked full time for Muhammad, he worked at MGM. And he had helped launch careers of some models and so forth. And he was also a photographer as a very serious hobby. Some of the best pictures, Howard Bingham is the photographer that you probably have seen more Muhammad photos from than anyone else. But next to Howard Bingham, Jean probably took more photos of Muhammad than anyone. So having that entertainment background and being a hobbyist as a photographer, Jean, before we left, said, "Let me take some shots of you and we'll see if they have potential. And I know some people and we'll see if we can help you." And sure enough, we did that and then exchanged our contact information. And he reached out to us, sent us some photos, reached out to us and said, "I think the pictures are great and we'd like to invite you to Muhammad's training camp." and we'll have a professional photographer come shoot some new photos for you. Because although my portfolio was found, it wasn't up to the standards
Right.
that he thought it should be. And so the next visit was in Deer Lake, Pennsylvania. I went to Muhammad's training camp, and it was right before the second Sphinx fight. And Gene had arranged to have a photographer there. And we went, my parents are divorced. And so I was spending the summer with my dad in New Jersey. And my dad drove my brother, my sister, me, my uncle, and my cousin all to Deer Lake, Pennsylvania for this photo shoot for me, because they all wanted a chance to meet Muhammad. And that was the first.
Hold on a minute. Let's go back, because I was getting ready to ask this question. Where was your mom and dad during all this? Like, what was their reaction when it first jumped off, when you left the portfolio in the car? Like, was you with your dad or your mom?
My mom and my stepdad.
What was their reaction when all this first jumped off?
I think everyone was excited to meet Muhammad, but I don't think any of us had any idea that it would turn into more than just, oh, wow, I met this celebrity and that was cool and it's a moment I'll always remember. I don't think any of us envisioned that it would become a big part of how we spent the next 5 years, a relationship that would shape me and open my eyes to the world. So yeah, I think no one could expect what came after it. So my mom was excited to meet Muhammad. My stepdad wasn't with us for the meeting. He was at business meetings in the city that day.
Right.
And then my biological father, who lived in New Jersey, he was against modeling. He thought, I have an intelligent daughter and I want her to focus her attention on something that will pay the mortgage, he used to say. And so he wanted me to become a businesswoman, and thought that modeling was superficial and a waste of time and money and energy, and not something anyone would do long term, and something everybody wants to do but people aren't successful at, and so forth. And he was wise in all of that. So he didn't really approve. But when Gene invited me to come to camp, he quickly agreed to take me. So I think he was excited. It was, modeling was one thing, but chance to be around Muhammad was something else. And so,
how long was the turnaround between the encounter versus them saying, let's come out to Pennsylvania? What was roughly the time span?
I would say roughly a month. And so that was in the summer. I don't know the date, but I know that was in the summer. And then I went back to camp again in September, when I was back in Ohio. And that time my mom came with me, and they invited me back again because Muhammad was going to be a guest on Good Morning America. And the hosts of Good Morning America, or at least the segment that he was doing, were a guy named David Hartman and a woman named Cheryl Tiegs. And Cheryl Tiegs at the time was a supermodel, and she was considered the first American supermodel. She was really big. And Muhammad thought it would be a great opportunity for me to meet her and get some guidance, some pointers. And so he invited me back, and that was in September. So in a matter of, maybe 2-3 months, we had our first 3 meetings.
So you got a chance to meet Cheryl Tiegs too?
Mm-hmm.
The universe was giving you all kind of breadcrumbs, man. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's the thing with Muhammad. Muhammad was the type of celebrity that other celebrities fangirled and fanboyed over. He was on a whole separate level. Yeah. And so being in Muhammad's orbit, you met a lot of people because everybody wanted to be around him.
Why do you think, now that you're older and more mature now, I'm pretty sure at that time that you've had the first encounter and went home, at that age, you probably was just like, oh, blah, blah, blah. You still did what you had to do. You had your friends and so forth. When this started to be really reality now, how did your mind shift? Because now you're dealing with the greatest well-known person in America at this particular point in time, and you're being invited to be in his presence not once, not twice, but multiple times. I know you talked about the age difference, but now how does this whole paradox shift? Because you now have a dad that says, okay, this may really happen, a mom, stepmom, and a stepdad, but you're still young. How are you perceiving all this? How is your mind shifting to get ready to adapt to a whole different way of thinking? But not only that, let's go deeper. And I think people need to understand this. Even though this was the 70s, we still dealing with racial diversity at one of its highest levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, there were a lot of layers to that question. So I think first of all, Strongsville, Ohio. Cleveland is diverse. Strongsville was not diverse at all. But Muhammad once said, probably more than once, but that to him, a lot of the world did not look at Muhammad as a Black man. Sometimes with success or fame, people feel as if you become exempt from your race.
Mm-hmm.
Muhammad hated that. Muhammad was a proud Black man, as anybody who knows him or has studied him knows. And it always bothered him tremendously that people would be racist, but not racist to him, as if because of what he had achieved, he was somehow, exempt from being a Black man, but they still held that racism against other Black people. So that infuriated him. Mm-hmm. But being from Strongsville, where there was no diversity, my life had not intersected with race, hardly at all, certainly not in any meaningful way. Mm-hmm. So it was an education for me to learn about race, about racism. And it was one that I don't know if I ever would have gotten had I not met Muhammad. I grew up with a lot of people who still live in that same town. It's become a little more diverse, but not much. But I'm so grateful for the ways my eyes have been opened to just a richer, broader, more diverse world through this experience with Muhammad.
Let's go back. Hold that thought.
Okay.
Hold that thought. Let's go back. Because like I said, I lived in Avon Lake. And mm-hmm. I know I didn't see none of this when I was there until Braylon Edwards got drafted, and he lived up the street from me. Yeah. And I remember, and this was in 2005. I remember my friend Krista Koff. They own Bucky Koff, the housing builders there. They would literally call me when somebody that was Black would come into the store in Avon Lake as a joke. They'd be like, "Hey, Dre." Yeah, that's what they say. Hey, Dre, somebody's here, and it really, and this is funny. People need to realize this. This was in 2005 and 2006, and you're dealing with suburbs that still have the problem.
40 years before that.
Yeah, in America. But my question to you is, what was the shock for you once you got introduced to a different type of culture that you was sheltered from and not put in that environment? How did that make you feel? But then more importantly, how did you look at your family in general? Were these topics that you brought up with your family? Because now you're coming out of Strongsville, you're going into the heart of what's really going on in America, in this country, period.
Yeah. It made me a lot more aware. So Cleveland schools desegregated right around that time. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I would have even paid attention to it had, I had my first boyfriend who was one of Muhammad's sparring partners, who was a Black man from Cincinnati. And, I'm seeing picketers on the street, protesters on the street, with vicious language, holding up signs with vicious language about, against desegregation. And all of a sudden that's personal to me, because all of a sudden they're talking about my friends. They're talking about my boyfriend. They're talking about people I know and love. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, I don't know if it really, it's shameful to say, because you shouldn't have to know people personally to care or to recognize the evil of racism. But as a young girl in the 70s, in such a segregated time and place, I was just clueless prior to that. And so I think what changed for me personally first was that I recognized it became personal. In terms of my family, there's a lot. My grandparents, oh gosh, I think about having Easter dinner at my grandparents' house and pulling out the pictures. I went on a trip to Australia and New Zealand with Muhammad, with his amateur boxing team, with a bunch of people. And I pulled out, not a bunch of people, but there were about 30 of us on that trip. So I guess it's a bunch. But we spent 2 weeks on that tour, and it was an amazing time. And I came back and I was excited, and I pulled out the photos and I showed my grandparents over Easter dinner. And my grandpa, I pointed out who my boyfriend was at the time. And I, pointed him out in a photo. And my grandpa said, "Oh, well, that one sure looks like a purebred," because he was dark skinned. And I wanted to just put the pictures away and how can you look at him and that's what you think, instead of saying how amazing that your teenage boyfriend is on Muhammad's amateur boxing team or sparring with Muhammad. Like, what an amazing experience. How cool is that? Tell us about him. But it was that one must be a purebred. And I thought, what a terrible thing to say. My grandparents were very, very racist. So much so that, fast forward years later, when I married my husband, none of them came to my wedding or anything. It was a sad, sad time to have that reaction. My parents were great to an extent. They did not want me marrying a Black man. So I guess that's not so great. But they loved the people that were in our lives, and still do love the people that were in our lives at the time.
How does that make you feel? And let me clarify something to the audience and the listeners. This ain't trying to throw Kelly up under the bus or anything, but what I want people to do is really sit back and listen to the story and ask yourself, this is what I'm going to ask you on this question, and two-part question. If that opportunity hadn't came, now roll with me for a minute here, because I think people need to understand this. You talked about your grandfather who said, "Oh, that's a pure blood, blah, blah, blah." Your parents, would they have accepted all of these things had it not been Muhammad Ali? I know this is a what if question, you know what I mean? Because the reason I said is because they didn't want you to marry outside of the race. But you are able to go on these tours with Muhammad Ali and blah, blah, blah. So I get what Muhammad Ali just said about, let's call it the past, because of who he is. Had he not been who he was, how do you think the narrative would have been? And I know that's just a hypothetical question.
Yeah, it is hypothetical, and I cannot say. I imagine that the reaction would have been different, for sure, and a lot less agreeable. I will say that I've been married 36 years, and my parents embraced my husband eventually. And
what do you mean when you say eventually? How long did it take?
Gosh, my biological father was, when my husband and I sat down with my biological father and said we were getting married, he said, I'm concerned about how the world will treat your children, but if this is the decision you're making, I'll love you both like my own, and I'm here for you 100%, and so on and so forth. So I think that's reasonable. I think that for a father to express his concern is a loving and protective thing to do. And he was concerned out of love. Our children have been loved by the world and very well received.
What were you afraid of? What were you afraid of? Because let's get real. That's real. That's a real situation that most people who are white and other nationalities, because it's not just white. I've heard other nationalities. I have a friend who is from Lithuania, and she says, Andre, I've never seen a black person in my life because there's none in Lithuania. And then she said, my first encounter with black people, she hated them, and she didn't even know them.
Wow.
And I asked her this question, I said, well, how did you not like them if they didn't have any? She said, because the people I was around always said negative things about them. She said, so what changed your mind? She said, I got to kind of like what you did. She said, I met a couple and was like, wow. But I get that they would say that. And I'm just thinking, just imagine yourself if you didn't get that opportunity. Yeah. Could your mind have been, I'm not even gonna say closed-minded, because I don't want to call closed-minded, because everybody's mind can be open. But just think, had you not had an opportunity, you might have been a product of that same situation or that way of thinking. Were you thinking that prior to me, Muhammad Ali? Was your mindset going that direction?
I think I was more just under a rock. Like I said, race, I had not had any real encounters with people of other races, which sounds crazy. I do know in our neighborhood, and it's hard to believe, but we lived in a part of Strongsville, a neighborhood called Ledgewood, and there were no black families there. And when the first black family moved into Ledgewood, someone burned a cross on the lawn, the kind of thing. Yeah. And I don't know for sure what year it was. It was prior to me meeting Muhammad. So I was certainly surrounded by that. I would like to think that time and progress and civil rights and so forth would have, that I would not have had that type of a heart. It's easy to say. I don't know.
So you married your husband, and your family eventually came around. Yeah. And so why do you think they came around? Is it because they was getting older? Is it because they looked at the world for what it really is? And once again, this is hypothetical. You really don't know unless they came to you and was like, hey, we had an epiphany and decided we shouldn't have been acting like this.
I would imagine that. So part of it, I think, is because my husband he's a great person, and he was incredibly gracious with them. But I also think, we've been married coming up on 36 years. My mom and dad got divorced, and my mom remarried. My dad was married 4 times. My grandparents were divorced and remarried on one side. I think the fact that nobody can argue that we have a great marriage, that has to go a long way. I think that when they met our kids, you hear that kind of story a lot. Parents object to interracial marriage, but then when the grandchildren come along, they fall in love with the grandkids. And that certainly played a part. I think that I remember the first time my mom met our oldest, and she was she was 2 years old, and my mom was carrying her around all the time. It was actually in Indianapolis, as a matter of fact.
Greatest city in the world, baby.
I had gone to Indianapolis on a business trip, and I brought my baby, my 2-year-old, and my mom drove from Cleveland to meet me, and it was her first time seeing her, and she held her and carried her around all the time. And I'm like, Mom, she does know how to walk. You can put her down. But she was smitten. She had fallen in love, and she's been an amazing grandmother to all 3 of our kids ever since. And so I think that had a lot to do with it too.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to Muhammad Ali real quick.
Okay.
And thank you for, I know that had to be emotional. There's a lot of interracial relationships, believe it or not, that share the same story. And it's funny. It's funny how children can change and soften the heart of the unbelievable into believable.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. Let's go back
Yeah.
to the greatest.
Yes.
You wind up going to meet one of the top actors, modelists and stuff. Now, what information are you being shared, and how do you continue to grow?
In terms of information being shared from her, what she encouraged me to do was to take any job I could get. And interestingly enough, the job I ended up getting soon after was a job of being an Ollie Angel. And an Ollie Angel, I sometimes say was a glorified ring card girl, and it was. But I like to say, and as I look back from today's perspective, I think it was kind of a brand ambassador for Muhammad Ali Sports. And I started doing that. And it gave me, it was not a great career move, but it gave me sort of a purpose for being there,
Right.
for going on all these trips, for being at all these fights, for time with Muhammad and this surrogate family that his entourage and the fight world kind of became for me through my coming of age years. So that was the whole role of Ollie Angel was very interesting because it brought up a lot of conflicting things in my just development into a young woman.
Mm-hmm.
And from Muhammad's perspective, I think he didn't love that. He didn't love me doing that.
Right.
I think that, Muhammad loved beautiful women, but he wanted women to conduct themselves in ways that would bring about respect. He wanted me to respect myself. And a ring card girl, you're putting on a bathing suit and you're strutting around the ring and shaking your hips and putting on a big smile and, getting the hoots and the hollers. And I think he thought I was maybe better than that.
And I'm so glad you was able to clear that up, because tabloids and media always seem to try to portray him as this womanizer and multiple women, and always trying to put a dim light on it. But you saw a different Muhammad Ali. You saw somebody that really appreciated women and valued them for who they really are. Were you close to him in his circle, like his wife, and if he had children at the time?
So he was married to Veronica during those years. She was his third wife, and we were never close. And they had two children, Hannah and Layla, and they were babies though, toddlers, babies. So
Mhm.
I played with them, played peekaboo, had them on my knee, shared some ice cream, that kind of thing with the
Mhm.
girls. Spent some time with Veronica, but we were never close. And at the time, I felt one way about it. I thought she was a little aloof, a little cold, maybe. I also thought she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life. Her
Mhm.
and Jane Kennedy. I was like, Veronica Ali and Jane Kennedy are the world's most beautiful women. And I believed that wholeheartedly. Um, and so she wasn't unkind, but she wasn't, she didn't welcome me in the way Muhammad did. And at the time, yeah, that made me feel, as they say, a certain kind of way. In retrospect, as an adult woman, as a married woman, I could see, she was young too. She was significantly younger than Muhammad. She was nowhere near as young as me, but she was a young woman. I could see why she would not have been delighted for this 30-some-year-old woman and her teenage daughter to be traveling around with us wherever we go, for reasons that may not have made sense to her, like I can see why she wouldn't have liked that. And as a Black woman, I could also see that perhaps, maybe not, I can't speak for her, wouldn't ever attempt to, but that might have also been a layer of it that I didn't understand. There's this white woman and her teenage daughter traveling around with us. So I certainly don't harbor any resentment at all towards Veronica for not, being that sister or mother or whatever figure for me at that time. Now, Muhammad's cook, Lana, was very much a mother figure for me at that time. Mm-hmm. She was almost Muhammad's age, but she was kind of like a second mom to Muhammad, and very maternal with me too.
But you mentioned his wife being a little bit nervous at that particular period of time when, race and everything is the center of focus and identities are questioned and so forth. How was you perceived with everybody else, and how long were you involved with the Muhammad Ali's family structure?
Did you say how was I perceived?
With everybody else, yeah. Because we know that we know that she was her. We know what she was young and so forth, but Muhammad Ali had everybody around him. So you're in that inner circle. How were you perceived by everybody else? Because let's be real, at that time, you're going into a whole different area from Cleveland, where everything is, you're around white people. Now you got to go into the blacks, where the blacks are just as scared of wondering if the white people is going to do something and vice versa. And you're still young and maybe a little bit naive, I guess we can call it at that time, until you really see what's going on. But how was you being perceived by everybody else?
Everyone else in Muhammad's circle, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I felt really embraced by the rest of Muhammad's circle. I think that people follow his lead. Mm-hmm. And if they know that Muhammad loves you, then they're going to look out for you. Some more than others. Muhammad and Jean were absolutely my protectors. Lloyd Wells, who's another guy who was, one of Muhammad's associates, so to speak, very much protector of me. The fighters on the amateur team, all were like brothers, except for the one that became my boyfriend. So, so I felt very loved. And I think, my parents divorced when I was 6. And when my dad left my mom, the way I heard the story from my mom was that he left her for his secretary, Giselle. And Giselle was a very beautiful, sexy woman. And I felt, as a 6-year-old girl, that my dad had not only left my mom, but that he had left me, and that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't lovable enough, special enough. And sadly, because of the way the world looks or looked, especially then, at women and what made them valuable, beautiful enough to keep my dad. And so I feel like at that time I was really looking for validation, mm-hmm. and looking for security and family. Mm-hmm. And I feel like they became a family to me. And, when I go through my scrapbooks, it kind of amazes me how many of these people I have letters from and birthday cards from and postcards from, and, that they were all family for that period of time.
Were you close to the Islamic community as well? Because we know Muhammad Ali was a devout Muslim. So were you embraced heavily with the Islamic community as well?
I was never involved in the community beyond those members of the Islamic community who were a part of his entourage. So Wali Youngblood Muhammad was a trainer, and a cornerman, and he was around a lot, particularly at Deer Lake at the training camp. And he was wonderful to me. Herbert Muhammad from the Nation of Islam would sometimes travel. Like he went on that Australia trip. The way I remember it, he may have just come for part of it. I don't remember him being around for the whole time. But and I was not the person that when Herbert Muhammad was with Muhammad or on a trip, I'm not the one in the group of 30 that he's going to sit down and have a lengthy conversation with. Mm-hmm. So I would not say that those are the people that I was closest to. But I was not, I know that we were just coming out of the white devil era of the Nation of Islam, where I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with it, but there was a time in certain teachings within sects of Islam that, when they were saying Black Muslim, where people were thinking, oh, the blue-eyed devil or the white devil and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we were coming out of that time. And I never felt that. I never felt that there was resentment or distrust because of my race. I kind of just felt like the kid's sister,
How close did you and Muhammad actually get when your parents and all that separated? Was he somebody did he ever pull you to the side and say, what's going on with you? How can I help you? I can see what's going on with a little bit of dysfunction over here. What can I do?
I don't remember conversations about my family so much, but I remember a lot of other conversations with Muhammad. One thing he would regularly say to me is like, any of these guys bothering you, you let me know, things like that. But I do remember one to answer your question, yes, there were a number of times that we had serious conversations. Mm-hmm. I remember a serious conversation about my mom, but not about, well, I'll just leave it at that for now.
What was the conversation about your mom? I'm curious. What did you share with him and what did he say to you?
Yeah, I just remember this was on an airplane and I remember him, asking me to tell him what I do love and appreciate about my mom and him sharing some things about his mom.
And how did it make you feel? What was you dealing with your mom, and how did his reaction change the narrative for you on how you were thinking about your mom?
I think it's easy for a teenager who can be, a little self-focused, a little immature, to take the things that your parents do for you for granted, maybe. And I think he wanted me to be grateful. We were on a plane, taking a trip that my mom took me out of school to allow me to go on, and I think he just wanted me to be grateful. So
what did he share about his mom? What did he say about how did he use the comparison? What was up with his mom?
I remember him saying like, how some of the things that his mom taught him and Rudy, his brother, Rudy, about loving all people, about religion. We had a lot of talks about religion, and he, even though he was a very devout Muslim, he had a lot of respect for Christianity or any faith, mm-hmm. and saw them as having many commonalities. And I think the central part of his faith was love. And mm-hmm. I think, he shared about that and how he learned about God and faith from his mom, even though his mom wasn't a Muslim. So I remember we talked about that. But the bigger conversation that came to mind when you asked the question was about him teaching me about forgiveness. And it was about a boyfriend relationship. And that person was someone that he was also close to, as I mentioned. And when we broke up, I struggled a lot with that relationship and with being around and that person and so forth. And he told me you need to forgive. And the reason why you're having a hard time is because he's a good man and you haven't forgiven him. And once you've forgiven him, you'll feel, totally different. And he was big on forgiveness. And so I remember that we talked at a fight, and then he said, come up to my suite after the fight and we'll talk. And I said, okay. And we went to the suite, and that was when we had that talk about him, sharing his conviction about forgiveness. So
when did you do what he asked you to do?
I did.
How did it make you
And
feel?
good. And I'm friends with that person to this day, thankfully. So.
When you spend a great deal of time with the champ, what are three most impactful things that you remember that's outside of the forgiveness that has really that you have played it forward into your own life?
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, you're going to get married, and you got to relive some of this. You know, I don't want you really marrying a man of color. You got these people feeling this way, but you're around. That's calling what it is the new Black Gandhi that's giving you some words that probably nobody else would have given you. So, what is three things that you remember now that you carry into your own relationships?
Mm-hmm. I think that, when you give somebody give me three, I can think of 10. So I think number
I give you five.
one, I think one of the things that I really value that I learned from Muhammad is mentorship. And what I mean by that is I feel like he poured into me and he was intentional about the times we had together. You asked if we had serious talks. Yeah. I think that Muhammad looked at people, no matter who they were, and could see through whatever veil they put up and whatever image they were trying to portray, and could see who they really were and see maybe what they really needed. And so I think mentoring, good mentoring, great mentoring isn't let me shape you into who I think you should become. Let me shape you into be like me, but it's let me point you to yourself. Let me help you meet you. Let me help you find the real you. I sometimes say that not only did I find myself in the middle of Muhammad's circle, like how did I end up here, kind of find myself, but I found myself in the middle of Muhammad's circle. And I think it's because of the way he mentored me. So that's the first thing. I think that I've mentioned it before. The way he looked at people, the way he respected all people, regardless of their walk in life, regardless of their race, their religion, whether they were poor or wealthy. I can think of so many stories where I saw him being respectful and having humility to others. I remember once being in line at a hotel to check in to a hotel, and this singer who was famous at the time, her name is escaping me right now, some old time woman singer, came and cut to the front of the line because she was a celebrity and she wanted to get checked in. And somebody else was telling Muhammad, go ahead, champ, go head up. And he's like, no, these people were here before me. And he wasn't going to do that, even though he very easily could, but he stood in line with us as we were waiting to check in when he didn't have to. It's a small example, but I remember going to a burger restaurant in LA and walking in with him and this guy named Harold Smith. It was a whole story in himself. But walking into the burger place and Muhammad saying hey, Jan, to the waitress or the hostess. And I was like, this lady's name. And he's like, I come here a lot. Why wouldn't I? He loved everyone. He respected everyone. He treated everyone the same. And if he saw you treating people differently, if you're nice to him but not nice to somebody else, he knows you're not nice, and he doesn't he doesn't want any part of that, doesn't respect that at all. And then I think maybe being truthful. I think that Muhammad was bold and truthful at times when he had to risk a lot to do that, whether it be his refusing to go to Vietnam because it was against his spiritual principles, mm-hmm. or him calling out racism boldly, no matter who he was talking to or who the audience was. And Muhammad always encouraged me to tell my truth, even when it was hard to do so, or especially when it was hard to do so. And I think that's what I've finally done in writing this book. I waited decades to write it.
What
In
was the hard
part,
part? Hold that thought.
yeah,
Let me hit you on that.
yeah.
Right in the book, to tell
Mm-hmm.
the truth. What were you holding back that it took you to come and write the book? So evidently, Muhammad Ali is been gone for a while to a better place, and now you're coming out with your own memoirs of it. But I take, by listening to your story so far, there's a lot of emotions or things that you haven't revealed, not only probably to me, but maybe to your own inner structure, your family, your husband. What are they?
I
What are they?
What are the things I haven't revealed to my husband?
Some of it, not all of it, because I want to buy the book. Not all of it, just a little bit.
Oh no, you like that. No, just kidding. I waited to write the book for a lot of reasons, and one of them was my husband. So I talked to him about writing this book many years ago, and he wasn't sure that he was comfortable with what I think he felt was our business being out in the streets at that point in time. Because if I was going to write the book, I was going to write it all.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to write the truth. I was going to stop trying to protect reputations, starting with my own. And yeah, there's no sense in telling a story. Nobody wants to hear an antiseptic story, and that doesn't honor anything. And like, truthful storytelling heals us. And so it was a big cost to count. Am I going to tell these stories? And am I going to tell them, my husband's going to read them and my children are going to read them. And, I did some foolish things, growing up, and I wasn't always protected by the people who maybe should have protected me growing up. And, how will that
What do you
reflect on?
mean, foolish things?
I mean, long story short, I'd say I went through a period of promiscuity as a teenage girl. That's one thing. I, went back and forth about where I got my worth. I pulled away from friends at home because I no longer felt I could relate to them because my life had become so different. A lot of things, uh, you know, 40 chapters of things. But when Muhammad passed away and a lot of other members of his inner circle passed away, I started feeling like, man, these are precious stories. Muhammad is a once in a, I would, millennium, I don't know, a once in forever man. And I didn't want, these people were going to the grave and taking their stories with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want that to happen with my stories. I feel like the world needs more Muhammad, and I wanted to get the stories out there. And so I started writing them. And that's how I began, is just like writing down, oh, I remember the time when Muhammad said this. I remember the time when we did that. I remember the time when we went there. And I started writing, but as I wrote, it all took shape, and it reshaped the way I viewed my journey, and it reshaped the way I viewed myself. And I saw a lot more of what he was trying to do with me. And the purpose of just sharing the stories about Muhammad changed. And I realized, no, this is my story, and he's so central to it, but this is my story. And writing it has been empowering and healing. And I think it's a story that people are going to be able to relate to, even though my situation is so unique. Being a girl and searching for your worth and authenticity and all of these things, what we're willing to sacrifice to fit in, all these things are really universal. So I was just
What did you
excited.
sacrifice to fit in?
Well, I risked a lot of relationships with my family. We talked about my grandparents for one. I, for a time, departed from who I was. I think just, I focused on the external. I focused on trying to be attractive to men, trying to make it in a career, not to judge modeling or acting, but in a career that can, focus on the external. And I don't think those are the things I was meant to do with my life. So I think I sacrificed myself for a while. The journey was beautiful though, but there was a lot to learn through it.
Why do you think Muhammad picked you? Or more important, let's rephrase this. Why do you think the powers to be put you two together?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about longevity here. You're forsaking your family. You're trying to find self-worth, self-identity. And throughout this whole journey of learning and growing, he's been almost like a Buddha for you during during this growing up phase. But now that you're older, he's no longer with us. You're getting ready to write a bestseller. Man, did I put that out there? But remember, I said that now.
Thank you.
What do you think? What do you think the whole concept of you guys coming together universally? And I know you can't speak for him, but how do you think he will receive what you're doing now?
It's a question I've asked myself so many times because I feel so fortunate. And I've also asked Gene Kilroy. I talked to Muhammad's business manager about an hour before you and I started talking today. We talk all the time. And I've asked Gene that too. What do you think it was? Why did you guys, because Gene was instrumental also, but why did you guys welcome us in that way? Why us? Why me? And Gene has often said, you were an innocent dove and Muhammad prized your innocence. And I think that Muhammad, as powerful as he was, as bold as he was, as courageous as he was, he had such a pure, innocent, childish heart. And sometimes you see that. I mean, he was a strong man of deep conviction, but he had a childish heart. He was so playful. And I think that, he became an Olympic champion in 1960. He was young. He won the heavyweight championship as a young man. He became a product. He became an image. His "I am the greatest," his braggadocio act wasn't who he was privately. And I've always wondered if maybe he felt like he lost his own innocence. I also think that, and now having a son of my own and just being an observer in this world, Black men lose their innocence. Black men lose their innocence young. People look at them in a different way. From my perspective, I'm, telling you, obviously, you're a Black man.
And I never heard it put like that. I almost brought a tear to my eye because you're 100% right.
I think it's true.
I never heard it mentioned in that text before, but you're 100% right. And it's sad.
It's very sad. It's very unfair. But if Muhammad felt that he, knew that he had an innocent heart, was an innocent heart, and felt that that innocence had been taken from him and taken from so many people around him, but looked at me and saw innocence, that is one of the answers that I've come up with Gene's help for why he embraced me, why he wanted to protect me, why he poured into me, mentored me during those years. Other than that, just, thank God. I don't know. I'm sure I wasn't the only innocent teenager he was around. But also I will say, I wasn't the only one he was like this with. I watched him with, I mentioned earlier, we traveled with the amateur team. Some of those kids were as young as 16, not quite as young as me, but as young as 16 when we started traveling. And you never knew who Muhammad was going to tap on the shoulder and say, ride with me. And he would pick one of the boys and they would ride with him. And I wasn't there to hear their private conversation, but I know he was investing in them, So it wasn't just me. He looked at people, he cared deeply about them, and he invested in them as much as he could, very intentionally, deliberately. And for some reason, I was blessed enough to be one of those people.
What can the viewers look for in this book that you're writing?
I share my journey from, an insecure girl, kind of desperate to prove to myself and the world that I, wasn't to be cast away, that I was special enough to love when I didn't feel that way. And my journey from that into a confident woman who cares more about giving love to other people than proving that I'm lovable. And it's because I learned that from the greatest person who I think loved better than anybody I've known.
You know what? And let's talk about one more person that's the greatest person to ever love you too, and that's your husband. Because now he's giving you the blessing to say, yes, you know what? Now it's your time to tell your story. How does that make you feel? That not only a great NFL football player, but you have 3 beautiful kids that are all Harvard graduates that's making a difference in this world. And sometimes we don't even know we're being a role model until something like this really happens. But let's talk about your husband. What's that like for you now and your family to embrace your next journey and writing a book about the greatest athlete that ever graced this planet?
Yeah, I am so grateful for his support. And I know that it was difficult for him to get to the place where he is right now. And that makes me that much more grateful, because if it were easy, it was easy, but it wasn't. It was hard for him. I remember, even reading chapters to him. We would sometimes lay in bed at night and I would read him the latest chapter that I wrote. And I remember one night when he said, I don't want to hear anymore. He didn't ask me to stop writing. He wants me to write. He's proud of me, but the book, takes a lot from anybody who's going to read it. It took a lot from me and it takes a lot from him. And he's got to face, all the things that his wife, the person who he loves and cherishes, went through, both good and bad. He also, is hearing about my first love experiences and romantic love experiences and things like that. And, that's not so fun for him.
Yeah, but I don't think that's fun.
that's not so fun for him, no. But we've been married almost 36 years and we're going to be together forever. And he knows he's my best friend. He knows that all the things that I went through during those years led me to him. Yeah. If it weren't for Muhammad, if it weren't for even the early, romantic relationships I had, I probably wouldn't have been looking for someone like my husband when I wouldn't have recognized him when I found the person that was right for me.
You got to make sure he hears this podcast, because that was beautiful.
He cheers me on like nobody else, and I'm so grateful. And he's amazing.
Tell the viewers the name of the book and when you expect the book to be released and why you picked the name of the book.
So I originally was working with the title "Love is a Heavy Weight" because I thought, man, the love that we give to others and the love that we owe ourselves is weighty. And Muhammad felt that weight of loving people. So that's what I started with. But then I decided to switch it to Little Trouble. And Little Trouble is the nickname that Muhammad had for me. Sometimes he just called me Trouble, sometimes Little Trouble. Sometimes my mom was Trouble 1 and I was Trouble 2. But I think that, even that nickname kind of conveyed how he wanted me to be protected, watch out for trouble. And then the subtitle is what Muhammad Ali taught me about holding on and letting go. And I've completed the book, I've had it edited, and now I'm building an author platform in order to get an agent and get it published. And if you're familiar with the publishing process, it can take a while, but I hope that people will follow as I, share pieces of this story and be ready to buy it when the time comes.
When that book comes out, first off of press, you're going to come back on the show. We're going to show that book. We're going to tell them where to go pick it up, how to order it, and read the bestseller that's going to hit this storm by since Muhammad Ali. Let's call it like that, since Muhammad Ali. How can the viewers reach out to you? How can the viewers reach out to you and support you and follow you on social media? Okay, that makes sense. Kelly, thanks so much for taking time to come on the show and share such a beautiful story, not only about you, but about one of the greatest athlete that ever walked the face of this earth, the one, the only Muhammad Ali. Guys, make sure you click that subscribe button for her, follow her, share some of your stories or questions that you may have about Muhammad Ali. She may reply back with something that I didn't even know. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, this has been, like I said, another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show.